Hey everybody, it's Paul Ramsey with Dr. Manny St. Victor. Another episode of Hypnotic Thoughts. How are you, Dr. St. Victor?
I'm doing great, Paul. How you doing?
Good. We're ready to wrap it up. I'm looking forward to this very much. We've had 2 previous episodes where we've talked to folks about attention, how attention works at a cognitive level, and now we're getting to the real, like, okay, but what do you do in your daily life? How do you control your attention a little better? How do you get it to set on the things you want? And so we're working in not just the concept of attention, but today we're also talking about intention, which I think is very, very important. I've said to my clients for years when I do coaching with people, I say, look, it's about intention and attention. How do you set your intention? And therefore, once you set that intention, how do you choose where your attention goes? Because we're often paying attention to the wrong things, quite frankly, right? So that's what we're talking about today.
Yep. And I think it's one of the most important topics out there.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think what I see, and I know you've worked, when you worked in the psych ward in Miami, I mean, you had some really serious, you probably didn't have people coming up going, I just can't shape my attention today. Get a little bit more serious.
Yeah. I chewed someone's face off and they're putting me in a paddy wagon. Yeah, that counts.
Right.
But I'm like, that intention was not set well this morning.
Not set, right? Yeah. But I mean, for everyday folks, I think there's this real pervasive thing nowadays of people have a sense that their attention is going to all the negative stuff, all the bad stuff in life. And they want to be able to focus more and more on what really matters and what's important. And it's almost like you'd think, well, so okay, just do that. But people seem to feel like they can't. They don't have control over their own attention in some ways.
Yeah, and often they get stuck in a rut.
Yeah.
In old habits, old cognitive habits, and old cognitive styles of thinking.
Now, you've talked to me before in some of our earlier stuff that we've created about myelination. Is that part of what that's really all about, this whole stuck in a rut thing?
Yeah, because the way your brain works is that concepts get activated. And when a concept gets activated by the environment, it shows up as in your consciousness. And your attention goes to that concept. And I like to think of attention as this, and consciousness as sort of this spotlight on your whole brain. I imagine your brain is this big topographical space. And when one part is more myelinated than another, that part is quicker to say, hey, fire me. Because you're like, okay, which of these 2 highways should I take? And your brain will be like, well, we always take this way. And that's the habit aspect. And
Right.
Over time, it fires together, it wires together. It's like what we like to say. You end up with a thicker, more insulated path that's about 10,000 times faster.
So and this is what, you did a great job in the earlier episodes where we were talking about attention of, you kept coming back to this and you're doing it again, and which is awesome, is this idea that we run 2 different sort of modes, right? Which in Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is what he focuses on in his book. Is we have really super fast thinking that happens pretty much autopilot, right? We don't think about it consciously, it just happens. And then we have slower thinking pathways where we are more deliberate in our process. And we want to get people to a place where they've created these fast, efficient autopilot systems, but most people don't have that, right? A lot of their autopilot stuff is functional, and then if some of their autopilot stuff is actually not so functional, they've created like bad myelination. They've created bad habit systems.
Exactly. And when they identify with them and they say, well, that's just the way I am, that's sort of how they get stuck in that rut that we need to pull them out of.
Right.
And that's by setting new intentions.
Right. Exactly. So our first thing that we want you guys to think about if you're watching this is, so if you identify something in your life, and it might be a habit, an actual behavioral habit, doing something over and over again that you really know you shouldn't, or it could just be a pattern of repeated thinking, negative thinking about yourself. Either way, those are both habits, right?
Exactly.
And so what we want is a way to interrupt the pattern. And any of you who have talked with hypnotists or NLP practitioners, this is a very popular tool in that world, but maybe most folks in the general public probably haven't heard of it. Pattern interrupt. So what Manny was talking about, that we have this, we create these pathways that fire very quickly and effortlessly. And what that allows us to do is just start getting into that rut, right? Beginning that process of thinking negatively or behaving negatively. And what you can do is you can practice becoming more aware of when you're getting into that rut, or that you're fully into that rut. And then you need a mechanism to interrupt that pattern. Now, I can take a variety of forms, all right? So to give you some concrete examples, one would be if it is a pattern of negative thinking, we tend to have an internal voice that we use. And so if you catch yourself talking in that negative way, one pattern interrupt you could do would be to actually modify the sound of the voice in your mind so that it's not the way you're used to using it, right? So a popular thing that people in the coaching community will do is they'll say, take that voice and make it sound ridiculous, make it high-pitched, make it sound like Mickey Mouse, right?
Helium,
So that,
helium
voice, yeah. So that by just changing it, it's harder to take it seriously, because part of your rut is you listen to the voice and you integrate what the voice says and you accept it. But if you modify that voice, all of a sudden you're laughing at it, or you like, that's just silly, and now you're not integrating it the same way. So that's one little kind of tricky tooly thing that you can do. Another thing you can do to really forcefully interrupt a pattern is you can just like forcefully put it in check, right? So I have a client, and this doesn't work for everyone, you know, it's up to you to decide if it's right for you, but I have a client, one of my coaching clients, who's a pretty like salt of the earth guy, right? And he's comfortable using bad language. And so what I did with him was I knew that sometimes getting angry can be a useful thing, right? So he had this pattern where he would start thinking negatively about himself. You know, I just can't do it anymore. I'm not as good as I used to be, this kind of stuff, right? I'm washed up in my career, stuff like that. And so what I did was I said, anytime you catch yourself talking to yourself about yourself in that way, right? Because what happens is we go internal and we get kind of soft and meek, right? And when we're feeling sorry for ourselves like that, I said, what you're going to do is you're going to literally say out loud, if it's appropriate. If it's not appropriate to say it out loud, you're going to say it in your head. Really, you're going to go, fuck that.
Yeah.
And for that guy, I knew that that would work. I wouldn't recommend that to everyone, right? But I knew I had to pick something that was really sort of coarse and like powerful and forceful with him. And then I said, you say that, and it's almost like slapping your hand down and being like, no, I will not. You know, if you don't like bad language, you could do that. If you catch yourself having that, you could go, no, I will not put up with that. And then you reshape, right? You reshape and you counter whatever it is that the negative thinking or talking or speaking was, right? You use your understanding of yourself to counter that and come back with whatever is the way to best refute the negative talk. Sound good, Manny?
Yeah, and it's the startling yourself that's funny, because you're almost playing a joke on yourself where you're like, I can't startle myself. And you're like, you put yourself in an emotional state that is different from whatever state you were in that was retrieving that habit memory.
Right.
Whether it's laughing at yourself for trying to surprise yourself, like trying to tickle yourself, you know, it's the fact that you grab your attention by the ears and steer it to somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And so the last thing in terms of pattern interrupts, there's lots and lots of ways to do pattern interrupts, but I wanted to give you guys 3 examples today. The last pattern interrupt you can do is, again, that corresponding body language shift that occurs when you're getting down, when you're feeling negative, when you're feeling stressed. You're going to have a body language shift that accompanies that. And so if it's sadness, your head's going to typically go down, your eyes are going to go down, your shoulders are going to drop, you're going to get sort of physically soft and meek. And so if you want to get out of that space, then what you're going to do is you're going to just literally reverse it all. You're going to find a way to make yourself get your head up, get your eyes up, bring the chest out and the shoulders back, and get more powerful. right? And so because we know that thinking creates physiological response in the body, and so like an electrical wire carries current both ways if you want it to, right? Like you can flip that around and say, okay, well, I'm going to change the body language so that it's much harder to feel that bad way. I'm going to get up. And if you want to really go big, you can get hands up, arms up, right? The way that people do, professional athletes, when they hit a home run or score a touchdown, they celebrate, right? This is a victory stance. It's a power pose. We can get into that. You can get that up, get it big, and then refocus immediately on what you want instead, right?
And power poses are very, very effective.
Yeah, super big, super huge. I've had colleagues before that have talked about, even doing the fist pump, right? The Macaulay Culkin Home Alone. Yes. Like no one does that when they're sad. Like it's this response that we sort of all hold in common, right? Of like, or, the other one would be like sometimes it's a little less common in America, but I've seen another like on I used to watch this Japanese game show. People were doing it all the time. Like whenever they get happy, they would this big. So there is this there's this thing about how we move matters. So those are some different ways to interrupt patterns through. So we covered inner voice. Body language, physical stuff, right? And that's some helpful stuff. So if you have more questions about that, leave comments on the event page on Google Plus or on the blog post where we'll put this, and we can follow up with you guys that way. So, Manny, next, I would really be helpful. I would be so appreciative. Can you explain chunking to us?
Yep. So your brain, your working memory, which is the part that we're associating with consciousness, can only hold in attention 4 items plus or minus 2. So what the brain has evolved as a mechanism of information management is chunking, where it can take 4 items and decide those 4 items are one thing. Like, for example, I'm looking at, I'm gonna grab one of these. I'm looking at this marker here. So instead of thinking, okay, it says Rosart, that's the name of the brand. They're not a sponsor or anything, but it says Rosart. There's a stripe there, there's a cap, there's a bottom, there's a circle there. But instead of holding all those things in memory, I'm just gonna hold marker in memory. Now, taken even further, I have this container. It's got junk in it, but it's my junk container. So instead of saying marker, ruler, pen, part of a Wii container, a part of a Wii controller, I say stuff in the container. Chunking is, and you do this visually as well as cognitively, is where your brain takes a bunch of things and combines them, a bunch of features is how we say it often, and combines them under one label. Now, what's important, in that way you can now have 4 things, each of which you could balloon out into other things, which can balloon out into other things, and so on. Now, where chunking is important is that when you mislabel something and you hold on to that chunk, you can get some pathology like that, because then it works all the way up, where you make decisions and other decisions and other decisions based on a misperception or mislabeling.
Right. So that was awesome. So for everyday folks, what we're talking about here is this idea that what people most commonly report is a feeling of overwhelm, right? Mm-hmm. Is they think of a thing, a task, a project, a life event that they care about and that is important to them, but it just feels too big and too overwhelming, right? So the marker, if we're staying within your symbol, right? The marker is huge. The marker is the size of a school bus, and I can't possibly pick up this marker and draw the picture I want because it's just too big. It's too overwhelming, right? Yeah. So the concept of chunking, the way that you can take it and use it to your advantage, you guys, is you practice. It takes a little time, but it's not hard. It just takes practice. You practice learning how to take that thing, whatever it is, and chunk it down to its smaller components so that the component is the thing you focus on and pay attention to, and the component is much more reasonable to think about doing.
Yep, and they call that deconstructing in some circles.
There you go. Thank you.
What's powerful also is to recognize that when you bring your attention down to the little pieces, it changes your relationship with that thing. In one case, for people who have trouble with compulsive eating, where they'll grab a bag of chips and just stuff their face and look down and they're at the bottom of the bag of chips. If you get them into the habit of pouring some into a bowl, closing the bag, and you say, you can have as many as you want. I'm not telling you not to snarf the whole thing, but put some in a measured bowl and go sit down and watch TV, eat that bowl, get up and get another bowl if you want. By breaking it down, you introduce measured amounts of control. Now, another thing is you can also chunk. When you chunk, you can chunk in time. Like when you chunk stuff down, you can do it in time as well. A lot of times someone has a goal and the goal is 3 months out or 3 weeks out, and they get nervous because they don't think they'll be ready for the goal. They don't, and what that shows is that you didn't break the goal down into sub goals, that you could accomplishable sub goals. And that carries with it the side effect that you don't imagine that after each sub goal, you will have learned from the experience of that. And if you rest and reward yourself, you can be a renewed, refreshed person with new skills ready for part 2. Then after part 2, you're someone who has learned from part 1 and part 2. You know, you didn't learn to ride your bike before you learned to crawl. You know, you accumulate the skills, and yet you don't want to devalue who you are now because of the skills you lack, because that makes it hard to learn.
What Manny's talking about, you guys, is a classic example of why New Year's resolutions don't work. Because when the new year comes, people grab this idea of what they want to accomplish, and they don't really think about how much time is really reasonable to accomplish that thing. And there's no deconstruction. There's no breaking it into smaller chunks. And so then they just have no way of getting really, you know, and the way that I explain that to clients a lot is I say, when we often talk about how do I get from point A to point B, what we don't realize is it's not point A to point B. It's point A to point Q. Mm-hmm. And you haven't figured out what all those points are in between. And that's where you get in trouble. So I think you explained that really well. And New Year's resolutions is just a concrete example of how that really plays out for people. But it could be anything. I mean, it could be you need to get a new job, mm-hmm. right? A lot of times when I have people in my life who are saying, I need a job, that's all they talk about. I need to get a new job. I need to get a new job. It's like, well, there are steps that lead to that. The job is the end result, right? But like, you know, I need to get my resume in order. I need to work on my interview skills. I need to, you know, figure out what the factors are of the jobs that are right for me and what I can do. And there's a lot of different subsets, right, that you could do to properly prepare you to get that job. But if you just keep focusing on, I need a job, I need a job, I need a job, because you're stressed, right? Stress does this to us. You're gonna struggle.
Yep.
Okay. So, and the other thing I want to say really quick is understand, folks, that we just talked about pattern interrupts and we talked about chunking. Don't think that those things are not related at all. Like this is all behavioral stuff and it interweaves, right? So when you have an issue in your life that is sucking up all your attention because it's stressful and hard, you have patterns within there that need to be interrupted, and you most likely have things that need to be chunked down, that need to be deconstructed. They're separate parts of the same overall problem, right? So they're not the same, but they're related. They're going to be connected. So when you start looking at how can you get better at breaking things down into smaller pieces so that you can get more done, somewhere along that, pattern interrupts are probably going to be part of that process. You're probably going to have times when you catch yourself engaging in negative behaviors or engaging in negative thinking. And one of those parts of that chunking process, that deconstruction, is how do you work on that in addition to the other things that need to be done?
Yep, and that's where intentions come into play.
Right? So that's what brings us exactly, Manny, to the final thing is, so really this all becomes ultimately a process of how do you create positive intention in your life? Well, we've talked for the past few episodes about attention, but once you understand how attention works a little better, you also need to really think about how do you create intention. And that's something that I think a lot of people probably take for granted, that you just think, well, life is just, it's happening, and there's things I pay attention to and there's things that I choose not to pay attention to. And it's like, yeah, but all of that really is predicated by what are your intentions with your life.
Yep. And what's one thing that's helpful is to clear the concept of intention up, is that the difference between a desire and an intention is that a desire just has in it the goal. And oh, that would be fun, and sort of the goal staked, how fun it would be. And intention has the goal and the path to the goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it holds a lot more useful data. It's how do I get there?
Yeah. So the idea is intention is something that you set and you take action toward, right?
Yep.
Yeah. It's really important that you bring that into your concept of, when you think about what do you want your intentions to be in your life, whether it's on a daily basis or a lifelong basis. If you're going to set an intention, what has to come with that is a commitment on your part to identify the things that need to happen, the action that needs to take place, so that you move toward that intention.
Yep. Now, one thing that's powerful about intentions, when you have them set in a concrete, clear way, is that intentions in your memory are more accessible than other types of concepts.
Tell me more about that.
One of the key things that determines your attitude, that determines your behavior, that determines what you perceive in the environment is accessibility. Because when you're perceiving, it's really recognition. You're like lamp, chair, baby, things that you recognize. Now, the things that you have more accessible in your brain are more likely to come to mind as you pan the room. If I'm preoccupied with, trying to think of an example. If I have a fetish for cookies or something, like I say fetish to give it sort of a fetishized feel, where it's like, I'm a cookie fan. I walk in the room and I pan the whole room, I'm gonna spot cookies. That is more accessible to me. People who have a racial bias, one of the first things they'll spot is race when they meet someone. It comes to mind more easily. Now, where that becomes useful is that when you set an intention, and I want to bring up kind of briefly, and then we can revisit, there are two kinds of intentions that are worth noting here. There are three kinds. There are goal intentions, which we discussed earlier. There are implementation intentions, which are the steps along the way. That's sort of the chunking process involves setting implementation intentions. They're like, if this, then this. If I see the spoon, I will, put it next to the plate because it's part of what I need. When you have your goal, you set your path. I imagine it as the footsteps from the future to the present backwards are your implementation intentions. The second thing is you're expecting certain obstacles and distractions, and so you set distraction intentions. If I see Fred and he invites me to go to the party as I'm headed to study for my test, I will not go with Fred. I will tell Fred next time or whatever. By setting those intentions, implementation and distraction intentions, you delegate to the environment your behavior. You don't have to use as much willpower. Your brain, once it has a clear idea of the goal, it makes the distraction intentions less salient, less accessible. You see Fred and you kind of don't even get worked up about wanting to go to the party. So you decrease temptation, and you're scanning the environment for things related to your goal more effectively. And all that happens on autopilot.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, so that's a real great connection back to what Manny's been telling us all along, right? Is our brains like what is most efficient and the least effortful. And so if you can help your brain create pathways where there's this increased myelination, where they're firing more easily and with less effort, then you're going to get that end result you want better and better and better as you support that process of myelination. So the catch is, right now, that feels really hard to do for a lot of people when they're in a negative place, because it's so foreign to what they've been experiencing. But if you use what we're talking about, if you start interrupting patterns, if you start deconstructing things into the smaller chunks and set yourself up for this stuff, then as you do it, you'll get that myelination. You'll get that decrease in effort over time as these things happen more and more quickly. So So let's just talk about, we got about 4 minutes before we wrap up. So let's just give a real simple structure for that, okay? You have something in your life that you want to change. You have something that you want to achieve. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to be able to clearly articulate what that goal is. All right, Manny talked about the idea that first, you know, you have to have the goal, but the goal doesn't become an intention until there's the implementation objectives underneath it, right? But still, we have to have that starting point. So what is the goal really for you? And when you outline that, it needs to be specific. It can't just be, I want to be happy or I want to be wealthy, right? These are too broad conceptually for your mind to latch on to, like, okay, how does that really exist for me in my life? How does that really work? You have to get down to a real clear image of what you want to achieve, whether that's a certain kind of lifestyle or a certain kind of personal physical health or a certain kind of relationship you want to have, but you have to get down to this real clear thing that you can really picture when you think about it. If you can really picture it clearly in detail, then you've got it. So then you move on to, how do you frame your actual intention beyond that goal, right? So what is my intention? My intention is to live my life in such a way every day that I work toward this thing. How long will it probably take me to have that? You don't know for sure, maybe you do, but frame it. And then what are the implementation objectives? What are the steps? And Manny's already talked about this, right? Is how do you frame the pieces that you can line up and say it starts with this, right? Again, we don't want you to get overwhelmed with the big thing. We just want you to know what the big thing is ultimately. Then you zoom in to this closer, smaller level. What's an implementation objective that'll get you started? What's the next implementation objective that you can do after you've achieved the first one and you recognize your achievement and you feel a little better situated to take on that next one? It's a plan. It's a real working plan for how you can create what you desire. If you need a symbol or a metaphor for that, I would say just think about the idea of, like, this goes back to everything Manny said with, like, the marker, right? Let's say you want to make yourself a sandwich for lunch. I really want a sandwich for lunch. Sandwich is this thing which really has components, right? It has parts. You need to go and get yourself 2 pieces of bread. You need to get yourself all the numerous items that are going to go between those 2 pieces of bread: meat, cheese, lettuce, tomato, pickle, mustard, mayonnaise, whatever.
Onions. Onions.
Onion. There we go. Onion. Manny wants onion. And then you construct that end product by arranging those things together. That's the process of, so you have the first idea of what you want, you figure out all the things that have to be layered together to make it happen, and then you build it. Well, that's the process for any of this stuff. You want to be healthier? There's your healthy image of yourself and what it means to achieve and have that in your life. What are all the things that have to be layered together to have it? And then instead of sitting there and going, oh my God, it's too much, then you start thinking about how do you create patterns that support you just focusing on, today I'm just going to focus on this one thing today. And then tomorrow I'll say, I did pretty good with that yesterday. How do I focus on this next thing today? And you keep putting all the chunks together until you've built the thing that you want. If along the way you struggle and you get into negative thoughts, negative ruts, you use pattern interrupts. You change your body language, you change your voice, you change your environment so that you can have a better energy set. And you just do it and you do it and you do it. But by breaking it down, you can create an intention for yourself. And then by having these things broken down, you will be able to shape day to day, hour to hour, where your attention goes. Manny, what have I missed?
You've covered it.
I covered it?
You got it. Yeah, man.
Good, because we're at 30 minutes. So, all right. So this is our episode about intention and attention. Hope you enjoyed it and you found it useful. Please, if you have follow-up questions, leave us questions at the Google Plus event page or over at hypnoticthoughts.com, and we will follow up with you and talk with you about any concrete examples you have. We'd be happy to follow up with you about that and give you some pointers about how to use what we've talked about in a very real, concrete way for you, okay? Come back and join us again next time at Hypnotic Thoughts. I'm Paul Ramsey.
And I'm Dr. Manny St. Victor.
Y'all be good. Have a great day.